My name is Priya Sharma, and for 3 years, my in-laws treated me like I didn't exist. Not invisible. Worse than invisible. Like I was a mistake their son had made. Like I was something they were tolerating until he came to his senses. They called me the wrong name for the first 6 months. Not by accident. I know it wasn't an accident because when I corrected my mother-in-law the 3rd time, she looked directly at me and said, "I know, dear," and then called me the wrong name again at dinner. They excluded me from family photographs. They gave my husband money for the family and specified it was not for me. They told their friends he wasn't really married, that it was complicated, and I smiled through every single one of those 3 years. I smiled, and I cooked, and I attended the family dinners, and I sent the birthday cards, and I played the role of the grateful daughter-in-law who was trying so hard to fit in. What they didn't know was what I was actually doing. What they didn't know was that I had been watching, documenting, building something they never saw coming. Before I tell you what that something was, take a second to like and subscribe, but only if stories about women who are underestimated and then become completely unstoppable mean something to you. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I read every single one. Now let me take you all the way back to the beginning. I married Arjun Mehta on a Saturday in October. He was the man I had chosen after 29 years of knowing exactly what I wanted and being patient enough to wait for it. He was kind, genuinely, unconditionally, not performing it kind. He had his mother's dark eyes and his father's straight posture and a laugh that started in his chest and worked outward that I had loved from the first time I heard it. He was also the eldest son of the Mehta family, and the Mehta family had very specific ideas about what the eldest son's wife was supposed to be. I did not fit those ideas, not because I wasn't accomplished. I had a master's degree in finance and was 3 years into a career at a mid-sized investment firm that was going well by any objective measure. Not because I wasn't educated or presentable or from a good family, because I was from the wrong kind of good family. The Mehtas had money. Old money by their community's standards, a manufacturing business that Arjun's grandfather had started, that his father Rajesh had grown, and that the family considered a dynasty in the making. They lived in a large house in the good part of the suburb, and they went to the right temple and knew the right people, and had, somewhere along the way, developed the specific quality of people who have enough to feel entitled to more. My family was not like that. My father was a high school mathematics teacher. My mother ran a small catering business from our kitchen, which she had built from nothing through 20 years of early mornings and late nights. We were comfortable, not wealthy. We were deeply loved, not particularly prestigious. When Arjun brought me home for the first time, I watched his mother, Sudha, look at me with the specific quality of appraisal that very practiced social climbers direct at things they're deciding aren't worth the investment. She smiled. She said, "Welcome." And something in the emphasis on the word, something in the brief pause before it, told me that the welcome had a very small radius. I told Arjun that night what I had felt. He said, "My mother takes time to warm up. She'll come around." I loved him. I believed him. I was wrong on the second part. We moved into our own apartment. Thank God for that. Thank God Arjun had his own place already and had the clear sense to say we would begin our marriage in our own home. But what we could not do was stay out of the Mehta orbit. Sunday dinners were mandatory, not requested, mandatory. Arjun had grown up with this, and it was so embedded in his understanding of family that questioning it felt, to him, like questioning something fundamental. I went to every Sunday dinner for 3 years. I want you to understand what those dinners were. The Mehta house was large and beautifully kept. Sudha had a particular gift for the visual presentation of a life that was doing well. Fresh flowers, every week, the good dishes, always. A table set as though company was coming even when it was only family. But the table had seating assignments that nobody stated and everyone understood. Rajesh at the head, Sudha beside him, Arjun's younger brother Dev on the other side, Dev's wife Meena, who had been carefully selected by Sudha from a family the Mehtas had known for 20 years, across from him. And then, at the end, me. Not physically at the end always, but conversationally at the end. The person the conversation moved past. The person whose contributions landed and then vanished like stones dropped into water too deep to make a sound. Sudha had a technique. When I said something at dinner, offered an opinion, told a story, answered a question, she would wait exactly long enough for me to finish, and then begin speaking to someone else. Not in response to what I'd said, not acknowledging what I'd said, just beginning a new thread as though my words had not occurred. It was surgical. She had clearly done it for years. To the world outside that table, Sudha Mehta was a gracious, warm, community-minded woman who hosted charity events and remembered everyone's birthdays and sent flowers when someone was sick. She had a reputation that was carefully constructed and genuinely maintained for public consumption. Inside that house, she was a woman who had decided her son had married beneath himself, and who expressed that decision through 10,000 small silences and redirections and exclusions. Rajesh was different. He didn't do the silences. He did something more direct. He talked about money. Specifically, he talked about the family business in ways that made very clear who was in and who was not. He talked about the future of the company, about succession, about what Dev was learning and what Arjun would eventually take over. He talked about investments and decisions and family strategy, always at the table, always including Arjun and Dev, and even Meena, who had grown up in a family adjacent to business culture, never including me. Not once in 3 years did Rajesh Mehta ask me a single question about my work. I was a finance professional. I worked with investment portfolios and asset management and risk assessment. I had knowledge that was directly relevant to every conversation he was having at that table. He never asked, because I was not part of the family's future in the way he had drawn it. I was Arjun's mistake, his complication, something to be managed until it resolved itself. The cruelties were not always quiet. There were the quiet ones. The name, the seating, the silences. But there were also the ones that happened in company, with witnesses, with an audience that either didn't notice or noticed and said nothing. The worst was at a family gathering in the second year, an extended family event, cousins, aunts, uncles, the whole network, about 40 people in the Mehta house. The kind of gathering where a family puts on its best self for its own audience. I was standing with a group of women, Arjun's aunts and cousins, when Sudha came over. She joined the conversation smoothly. She spoke to each person. She asked about children, about husbands, about plans. Then someone asked her directly, "And Arjun's wife? She works in finance?" Sudha smiled. "She works at a small firm," she said. The word small was deployed with such precision. It's nice for her to have something to do. Something to do. I held my glass. I did not react. I smiled. The woman who had asked gave me an apologetic micro-expression, one of those looks that lasts half a second and says everything. And the conversation moved on. I went to the bathroom and stood at the sink and looked at myself in the mirror. And something happened. Something that had been building for 2 years finished building. I looked at my reflection and I thought, I am not going to leave. Not yet. Because if I leave now, I leave on their terms. I leave as the woman who couldn't handle it. The one who, as Sudha would frame it to the next 40 years of family gatherings, wasn't quite right for Arjun. I am going to stay, and I am going to learn everything, and I am going to know exactly what I'm dealing with before I do anything about it. I dried my hands on the towel. I went back to the party. I smiled for the next 3 hours. Here is what I started paying attention to. I want to be specific, because the specific is what matters. I had been in finance for 4 years by this point. I understood numbers. I understood how financial systems worked, legitimately and otherwise. I had, in the course of my professional training, learned what certain patterns looked like when they appeared in financial data. Patterns that most people would not notice, because most people were not trained to see them. I started noticing patterns in the Mehta family business. It started at a Sunday dinner. Rajesh was talking about the business, as he always did, and he mentioned, without apparent awareness that I was listening carefully, a specific transaction, a property acquisition. The numbers he cited, casually, over the lamb curry, did not add up in the way they should have if the transaction was what he described it to be. I filed that. The next Sunday, another detail, another number that didn't quite land where it should. I began keeping notes. At home, after each dinner, I would write down what had been said. Numbers, names, transaction descriptions, references to clients and partnerships. On their own, each piece was nothing. Together, they were starting to form a picture. I want to be precise about what I am and am not saying here. I was not an investigator. I had no authority. I was not accessing anything I wasn't supposed to access. I was a trained finance professional sitting at a dinner table, listening to a man describe his business, and noticing that some of what he described did not cohere with what legitimate business transactions looked like. I noticed, and I paid attention. The clearer the picture became, the more careful I was about not reacting. The more Sunday dinners I attended with my careful smile. The more birthday cards I sent. The more warmly I answered Sudha's occasional pointed questions about when Arjun and I were planning to start a family, as though I were a problem to be resolved through the production of grandchildren. I was playing a longer game. What they didn't know was how long. 8 months into my quiet observation, I had a conversation that changed everything. It happened at work. A colleague, a man named Vikram, who had been in financial compliance for 15 years, and who had the particular quality of someone who has seen every possible way people try to make money, disappear, and reappear in different hands, was reviewing a case study for a training we were developing. He described a pattern, a specific method by which family-owned businesses sometimes reclassified personal expenses as business transactions, how they moved money between entities in ways that obscured both the origin and the destination, how certain tax structures used in bad faith could constitute fraud that was significant enough to attract federal attention. He described the pattern in general terms. I recognized it in specific terms, because it was the pattern I had been watching at Sunday dinners for 8 months. I stayed late that night. I sat at my desk, and I thought very carefully about what I was doing and what I was going to do. I was married to Arjun. I loved Arjun, whatever was happening in the Mehta business, and I was not yet certain enough to call it anything. It was connected to my husband's family, to his inheritance, to his future. I had to be completely certain before I did anything, and I had to decide what doing anything even meant. I called my sister Divya that night. She was a lawyer, not in financial law, in family law, but she knew people. She had, over the years of watching me navigate the Mehta family situation, developed an opinion that she had largely kept to herself at my request. I need to talk to someone, I said, about something I've noticed. I've been waiting for this call, she said. Not about the family stuff, I said. About something financial. A pause. Tell me, she said. I told her what I had observed, carefully, without conclusion, just the pattern as I understood it. She was quiet for a moment. Priya, she said, you need to talk to a specific kind of lawyer, not me, someone in financial fraud. I'm not ready to go that far, I said. I'm not saying you are, she said. I'm saying you need to understand exactly what you're looking at before you decide what to do with it. You need someone who can look at what you have and tell you if it's what you think it is. And if it is, I said, then you have options, she said, and you make choices on your own terms. She gave me a name. His name was David Kapoor. He was a forensic accountant who had spent the first 12 years of his career at a federal financial crimes unit and the next 15 in private practice, doing exactly the kind of analysis I needed. I called him. I told him I was a finance professional who had observed a pattern in a family business through conversations, and that I was not sure if what I was observing was legitimate or not, and I needed an expert to help me understand. He said, that's exactly what I do. We met twice. I shared my notes carefully, without identifying anyone by name in our initial conversations, just the patterns, the numbers, the structural elements of what I had observed. He listened. He asked clarifying questions with the precision of someone who had done this for 27 years. At the end of the second meeting, he leaned back in his chair. What you're describing, he said carefully, is consistent with a pattern of tax fraud and asset concealment that I would estimate, based only on what you've shared, has been running for somewhere between 7 and 12 years. He paused. If the specifics bear out, you're talking about a federal matter. I sat with that. What would happen, I said slowly, if someone with documented evidence of this contacted the appropriate authorities? There are provisions, he said, for what's called a whistleblower submission. Depending on the scale and the quality of the evidence, the person submitting can receive significant protections, and depending on the outcome of the investigation, financial consideration. I looked at my hands on the table. How do I get the specifics to bear out? I said. Tell me everything, he said. The next 4 months were the most precise work I have ever done. I am a finance professional. I am methodical by training and by temperament. I understand documentation. I understand the difference between what you suspect and what you can demonstrate. I documented everything. The dinner conversations, now recorded in detailed notes within minutes of each dinner. The specific transactions Rajesh referenced that I cross-referenced against publicly available business records. The property purchases and sales I could trace through public county records. The pattern of entity creation, new LLCs, holding companies that I could identify through state business registrations. David helped me understand what I was seeing. He helped me understand what was significant and what wasn't. What was aggressive but legal tax strategy and what crossed a line. He translated the evidence from the language of suspicion into the language of documentation. By the end of 4 months, we had something. Not everything, not a complete picture, but enough of a picture that David said, "In our last meeting before I had to make a decision, this is real, Priya. What you found is real. If you submit this, it will be investigated. And based on what I've seen, the investigation will find more." I sat across from him. "I need to tell you something else," I said. He waited. "My husband is the heir to this business," I said. "He doesn't know what I know. As far as I can tell, he has no knowledge of what his father has been doing." David was quiet. "Are you certain of that?" he said. "As certain as I can be without having told him," I said, "which I haven't." "You're going to have to tell him," he said, "before anything else." "I know," I said. "And the conversation with your husband has to happen first," he said, "because what happens after is going to affect him too." I drove home that night, and I sat in the parking lot of our apartment building for 40 minutes. I thought about Arjun, his kindness, his laugh, his belief, genuine and good faith, that his mother would come around, his love for a family that I now knew had a rot in it that he hadn't seen because he had grown up in it, and it was the only model he'd ever had. I thought about what I was about to do, not just to the Mehtas, to him. I got out of the car, I went upstairs, I told Arjun on a Sunday night, not after a Mehta dinner. I had not gone to that week's dinner for the first time in 3 years, claiming a headache. I needed one Sunday in our apartment, just us, before I said what I had to say. We were in the kitchen. He was making tea. He always made tea on Sunday evenings. It was one of the things I loved about him. This particular ritual. "I need to tell you something," I said, "and I need you to listen to all of it before you respond, even the parts that are hard." He put down the kettle. He turned and looked at me. He knew from my face that this was serious. "Okay," he said. I told him everything. From the dinner 8 months ago when I first noticed the number that didn't add up, through the months of documentation, through the meetings with David, through what I now believed, with significant supporting evidence, was true about his father's business. I told him clearly, not to manage his reaction, not to soften it more than honesty allowed. I told him the truth. He sat at the kitchen table when I finished. He was very still. The tea was forgotten. "You've been doing this," he said slowly, "for 8 months. "Yes," I said. "While going to every dinner," he said. "While the whole time?" "Yes." He was quiet for a long time. "And you believe it's real," he said. "Not just accounting differences, not just aggressive strategy. David has been in this field for 27 years, I said. "He believes it's real, and I believe him." Arjun put his hands flat on the table. He was doing the thing he did when he was processing something enormous, going very still, going inward, giving the thing the space it needed before he responded. I waited. "My mother," he said slowly. "She knows." "I think so," I said. "The lifestyle of the house, the way money is discussed. I don't have direct evidence that she's involved in the business mechanics, but I think she's aware." He closed his eyes. "Arjun," I said, "I need to know where you stand, because what comes next is going to be significant, and I need where I stand," he said. He opened his eyes. He looked at me. "I stand with you." "That's not even a question." He paused. "But I need a few days to understand this, before we talk about what comes next." "Okay," I said. "Tell me something," he said. "Why did you do this the way you did? Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I looked at him. "Because I needed to be certain," I said. "Because if I told you with a suspicion, and it turned out to be nothing, I had handed you a story about your family that could never be completely untold." I paused. "And because I needed to do this myself. They spent 3 years telling me, in 100 different ways, that I wasn't capable of understanding their world." I looked at the table. I needed to understand it on my own terms before I said a word. Arjun looked at me for a long moment. 3 years, he said. They've been treating you, yes, I said. He closed his eyes again. I should have seen more of it, he said. You saw what you were raised to see, I said. That's not the same as choosing not to see. He reached across the table and took my hand. Whatever you decide to do, he said, I'm with you. We submitted the whistleblower documentation to the appropriate Federal Financial Crimes Division 11 days later. David accompanied us. He had helped us organize everything into the form that was most useful for investigators. Not just the summary of what we'd observed, but the documented evidence organized by category and timeline. The federal agent who received us was a woman named Agent Torres. She was in her 40s, economical in the way of someone who had learned that words worked better when there were fewer of them. She read through the summary document while we sat across from her. She looked up. How long did it take you to put this together? She asked me. 8 months of observation, I said. 4 months of documentation with a forensic accountant. You did this while attending family dinners, she said. It wasn't quite a question. Every Sunday, I said. Something moved in her expression. Not quite a smile, something adjacent to respect. This is well organized, she said. We will be in touch. I want to tell you about the 4 months between submitting the documentation and what happened next. They were strange months. We continued going to Sunday dinners. Not every week. I began occasionally having other commitments, and Arjun covered for both of us more than before. But we went enough. And I watched Rajesh and Sudha at that table. Rajesh still talking about the business, still dropping numbers that didn't cohere, still treating me like furniture. Sudha still redirecting conversation away from me, still calling me by the slightly wrong version of my name on occasion, still performing her perfectly maintained version of gracious family matriarch. I watched them. I said almost nothing. I ate the food. I smiled. I had never smiled more, and meant it less in my entire life. Arjun, beside me at those dinners, was managing something enormous. I watched him doing it, watching his father and his mother with new eyes, seeing things he couldn't unsee, maintaining the surface while the understanding of what his family actually was settled into him like something heavy settling to the bottom of deep water. He was not okay. I want to be honest about that. This was not easy for him, and I did not pretend it was. We had hard nights. There were tears, his and mine, for different reasons. There were conversations that went very late and left us both exhausted. But we were together in it. That mattered. That was the thing that made it survivable. The call from Agent Torres came on a Tuesday morning in February. The investigation is proceeding, she said. We have what we need to move forward. I'm telling you because your submission was central to opening this. You should be aware that the process from here will take time, and you will likely not be informed of every step. A pause. But I wanted to say, what you brought us was thorough. It made our work significantly faster. Thank you, I said. One more thing, she said. You should speak with your lawyer about next steps for your personal situation. The impact on family members who were not involved is something that should be addressed independently. I understood what she was saying. Arjun had already spoken to a lawyer. He had already begun the process of legally separating his own professional future from the business his father had built on ground that was not solid. He had done this quietly, carefully, on his own initiative, not at my request, because he had spent 4 months understanding what his father had done and deciding who he wanted to be. He chose differently. That was his choice. I loved him more for it than I had loved him for almost anything. The day everything became public was not a single day. It unfolded over a week. The federal inquiry became known first within the business community, the Mehta family's business partners, their suppliers, their bank contacts. Then it reached the community at large. Then it reached the Sunday dinner table in the form of a conversation that I was not part of, a conversation between Rajesh and Sudha and their lawyers that apparently went very badly. Arjun told me what happened after that conversation. His father had called him. Rajesh Mehta, the man who had sat at the head of that table for 3 years as the architect of his family's destiny, had called his eldest son to tell him what was happening. And in the course of that call, Arjun had said something. He told me about it that night. He asked me if I knew, Arjun said, if I had any knowledge of the investigation before it started. What did you say? I asked. I said that I had found out, that I had been told. He paused, and then he asked me who told me. The room was very quiet, and I said, "My wife," Arjun said. "My wife told me." And she knew because she had been paying attention for years, because she is smarter than anyone at that table ever gave her credit for. I held his hand for a long moment. "How did he respond?" I said. Arjun was quiet. "He didn't," he said. "He just stopped talking. I want to tell you about the last Sunday dinner. It happened about 3 weeks after the investigation became known. We didn't go to the Mehta house. Sudha called and asked us to come. Arjun, after a conversation with me, agreed to go once more. We sat at the table. The flowers were there, the good dishes, but the table was different. Smaller. Dev had quietly distanced himself, and Meena, who had her own calculations to make, had made them in her favor. Some of the aunts and uncles who had been present at every gathering for years were absent. Just us, and Rajesh and Sudha. Dinner was quiet. Rajesh said almost nothing. Sudha spoke. She talked about ordinary things in the way of someone trying to impose normalcy on a situation that had no normalcy left in it. She talked about a charity event she was involved with. She talked about the weather. And then she looked at me, really looked, for possibly the first time in 3 years. "Priya," she said. "My name. Correctly." "Yes?" I said. A long pause. "I owe you an apology," she said. "The table was very still. For how I have treated you," she said, "in this house. It was wrong." I looked at this woman who had spent 3 years making me feel like a footnote in her family's story. "Yes," I said. "It was. I did not say it's okay, because it wasn't. I want you to know," she said, "that it had nothing to do with you. You are Sudha." My voice was quiet but clear. "I know what you're going to say. That it was about circumstances, about expectations, about things beyond either of us. And I'm sure that's partly true." I paused, but the way it was expressed was a choice. Every Sunday, every dinner, every redirection, every time my name wasn't quite right, those were choices. She looked at the table. "I know," she said. "I don't need you to explain it," I said. "I just need you to understand that I saw all of it, all 3 years. And I stayed anyway." She looked up. "Why?" she asked. It was the most genuine question she had ever asked me. I looked at her. "Because I married your son," I said, "and I decided that I was not going to let how you treated me determine how I showed up in this family. That was my choice." I paused. I also stayed, because I needed to understand what I was actually dealing with. And I did. The table was completely silent. Rajesh was looking at his plate. Arjun's hand found mine under the table. "I don't know what happens to this family now," I said. "That's not in my control. What happens with the investigation, what happens with the business, those are consequences of decisions that were made long before I came into this house." I looked at Sudha. What is in my control is who I am. And I'm still here, as Arjun's wife, whatever that means going forward. We finished dinner. We drove home. I did not cry. I looked out the car window at the city passing by, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 3 years. Light. What happened to the Mehta family business was a federal matter that took 18 months to resolve. I am not going to give you details that aren't mine to give. What I will say is that the investigation found what the documentation suggested it would find, and then more. The resolution involved significant penalties, the dissolution of several business entities, and consequences for Rajesh Mehta, personally, that changed the family's financial landscape entirely. The house was sold. The standing in the community that Sudha had spent 30 years carefully constructing had to be rebuilt from a different foundation. Smaller, more honest, more real. Dev and Meena navigated their own version of this. They made their choices. I respected that those were theirs to make. Arjun built something new. He took what he had learned, legitimately, from working at the edges of his father's business before any of this, and he built his own company. Small, honest, built on ground he had walked himself. I was involved in the financial architecture of it, because I was his partner, and because I actually knew what I was doing. We are building something together, something that will hold. Here is what I want you to understand about the 3 years I spent smiling at that table. It was not weakness. People will say, "Why did you stay? Why did you smile? Why didn't you confront them, call them out, leave?" I stayed because I chose to. Because I had decided that the terms of my departure, if it came to that, were going to be mine. Because I had decided that I was not going to let people who underestimated me force me into a reaction that confirmed their underestimation. And because I had decided to understand exactly what I was dealing with before I did anything about it. That is not passive. That is the most active thing I have ever done. The patience was strategy. The smile was armor. The dinners were intelligence gathering. And the woman they thought was the quiet wife, who couldn't quite fit into their world, was, the whole time, the most observant person in the room. Here is what I also want to say. What I did was not revenge. I know that's in the title of this story, and I know that's what makes people want to hear it. But let me be precise about what actually happened. I found the truth. I documented it. I reported it to the people whose job it was to act on it. And the consequences that followed were the natural consequences of what the Mehtas had built. I didn't ruin their family. Their family was built on something that was already rotting. I just held up a light. And the light showed what was there. That is not revenge. That is honesty. And honesty, when it arrives with documentation and a forensic accountant, has consequences that feel very much like justice. Suda called me 6 months after the investigation concluded. I answered. She sounded older, smaller. "I've been thinking about what you said at dinner," she said. "That you stayed because you decided not to let how I treated you determine how you showed up." "Yes," I said. "I want you to know," she said, "that I have thought about that every day since." A pause. "I treated you like you were less, and you were more. You were always more than I let myself see." I sat with that. "Why are you calling me today?" I said. "Because I wanted to say it directly," she said, "without an agenda, without needing anything from you in return. Just to say I was wrong. You were right, and I am sorry. I thought about the 3 years, the wrong name, the seating, the silences. Something to do. I thought about the woman in the mirror at that family party who decided she was not going to leave on their terms. Thank you for saying it," I said. "Is there any chance?" she started. "Suda," I said gently, "I don't know yet. Give me time." She said okay. She hung up. I put the phone down. I sat in the office of our apartment, the office where I had, 2 years ago, stayed late building the documentation that changed everything, and I thought about time, about what it does, about what it makes possible, about how the same quality, patience, that I had used to survive 3 years of Sunday dinners was the same quality I was going to need to figure out what came next. I was in no hurry. I had learned, above all things, that the people who can wait the longest often determine the outcome. My name is Priya Sharma. My in-laws made my life hell for 3 years. I played along. I smiled. I learned. I documented. And when the moment was right, I let the truth do what truth does when it is thoroughly and precisely assembled. The lesson is not, get revenge. The lesson is, get clarity, get certain, get documented. Know exactly what you are dealing with, and know exactly what you are capable of before you move. The people who underestimate you are giving you a gift. They are giving you the gift of being underestimated. Use it, quietly, thoroughly, and when you are ready, fully, completely, undeniably ready, let the truth speak. It is always louder than anything else in the room.